I'm going to be ranking all the VR controllers over the last 15 years.
S tier being the best and F tier being the worst.
And at the end of the video, I'm going to promote one to the king spot and put one in the trash spot. Starting off with the Razer Hydra. It was made in collaboration with Sixth Sense Entertainment. It was actually released in 2011. Valve even teamed up with Razer. They created new portal levels and mechanics to be used with the controllers.
Said it's a magnetic field. It measures true position, true orientation, 6 degrees of freedom. The best way to sort of give you a good example is taking a cube and I go into this one-to-one mode and I can reach out in front of me and you can see how precise it can be. I can barely move. And you can see the cube barely move. We got a 1 millimeter of accuracy in positional change and 1 degree of accuracy in rotational change.
It was originally only intended to be used for games, but it didn't take the community long to start using it for other things. Then, when VR came along, people started implementing it. It was a bit susceptible to interference and the range wasn't the best as it had wires. But it's just an incredible solution for the time it came out. If you hid the sensor over something, the magnetic field could still track it, which I think is really cool. The controllers were wired, meaning they didn't need batteries and could run forever. That said, it's extremely annoying being tethered to wires while you're playing. It was one of the first ways to track your hands in VR with full positional and rotational movement. Back in the day, it would have gotten an A tier, but now I'd probably give it a C tier, just based on the innovation and how cool the technology is. There are just better options now, so they're completely redundant. So the Gear VR was a collaboration between Oculus and Samsung. The controllers feel good in your hand and they're super light for scrolling. One of the best things about them is the scrolling thing on the top. There's basically a trackpad. That said, you can't move it around freely in 6 degrees of freedom. You can only move it on the angles. It has up to 40 hours of battery life, but I don't think a single person on planet Earth has ever used one of these for that long. Most people I know use it for cooking videos, if you know what I mean. It's going in F tier. I never want to use this controller again. There were plans to make a controller with 6 degrees of freedom movement that would work with Gear VR, but these plans got trashed. Okay, so this guy called Lucky Palmer came along and the VR world's starting to become a reality. Along with the release of the CV1, we got this new 3DOF tracking controller. It only works on the angles and doesn't have positional tracking. It feels comfortable in your hand and the battery lasts longer than you would ever use it for. It was always a temporary controller until they finally finished the real ones. I'm gonna have to put it in F tier. They're just completely useless. The HTC Vive got released, and unlike Oculus, they actually released with controllers that were designed by Valve. They aren't the most comfortable to hold and are a bit outdated by modern standards. Valve decided to go with a trackpad on the top, and it's pretty clear now that a joystick was the right option. They use Valve's Lighthouse base stations, which just have flawless tracking. They work in a lot more lighting conditions compared to Oculus's ones, and the range was amazing. They also run wirelessly, so you don't have to run cables all around your room like the CV1. The batteries lasted about 4 hours in the controllers, and you would recharge them with a micro USB cable, as the battery was built into the controller. I usually prefer external batteries just because it allows the controllers to last longer, but it is what it is. My Vive is about 10 years old, and I don't have a problem with the controllers yet. I'm gonna have to put them in B tier. The shape they made them in is just awful. The addition of no joystick just makes playing games impossible. And finally, things were starting to ramp up, and the CV1 got these brand new touch controllers. Some of the first mass market VR controllers with 6DOF movement ever made, meaning they had full positional tracking. As soon as you put them in your hands, it feels amazing. It features these rings which protect your hands from hitting the wall. It has capacitive touch sensors, meaning it can sense if your fingers are on the buttons or not. Not to mention the shape, which conforms to your VR hand perfectly. It gets tracked using the CV1's infrared trackers, which pick up a little light on the controllers. The tracking to me is perfect. While technically not as good as Valve's solution, I preferred it because the cameras never broke and they were completely silent. However, they were affected by light and they didn't scale the best. You would have to physically run USB cables around your room to get them working. I never noticed an issue with the accuracy either. The controllers ran on AA batteries. I'm gonna put them in S tier. These are some of the best VR controllers ever made, and it's just incredible they were some of the first as well. Sony entered the VR market with the PSVR. They decided to repurpose their old Move controllers, which they dug up from the grave of the former failed PlayStation Move. That's a story for another day. The controllers are actually quite comfortable. The buttons are strangely placed though, and the lack of a joystick makes it pretty hard to recommend. The tracking, I would describe as borderline unusable, and the buttons followed a similar fate. Maybe Wes Watson could find a use for these, but it's an F from me. So Microsoft decided to enter the game with their Windows mixed reality controllers. They released to be used with Microsoft's new flagship mixed reality software.
Back then, it was sold to us as the most budget-friendly way to play VR.
We will have the most affordable headset plus motion controller bundles, priced at just $399 for the set.
They use inside-out tracking. The controllers have these small LEDs on them, and the camera on your headset picks them up and translates the position onto the computer. If I told you the tracking on these was good, I would be lying. It's just bearable. Back then, maybe it was okay, but now I couldn't imagine ever wanting to use it. You'll often find it pausing, and the occlusion issues are terrible. That said, they were quite ahead of their time, and it's much easier not having to fiddle around with annoying base stations to play VR. You can just pick these up and get going.
I'm gonna have to put them in D tier.
Okay, then we got the Oculus Go for some reason, and it came with that similar remote to the Gear VR and original CV1.
It's got that 3 degrees of freedom tracking, and you all know how I feel about that by now.
I'm just going to save us all some time and just put them straight into F tier. I wouldn't want to use them for anything. So, the Vive ones are getting a much needed upgrade to work with Valve's new 2.0 base stations. Apparently there were some upgrades to it, like a more reliable trackpad, and with the new space stations you can use a bigger space and more items will be tracked in that space. It's the same as the original ones in my opinion, and
It's going into B tier.
I think a bare minimum in this update would be for HTC to add a joystick and angle the controllers a bit so it feels like you're holding it with your hand. Then Vive decided that they'll dip their feet into standalone headsets. The headset tracks with 6 degrees of freedom movement, but the controller only tracks with 3 degrees of freedom movement, and we're back to having a puck. I don't want to use these controllers ever again. They're just not good. And this is just going into F tier. I hope I don't have to use another one for this video. Now, Oculus created these touch controllers, which use this new inside-out tracking technology. They were made to be used with the Rift S and new standalone product, the Quest. They are super comfy to hold, and I love the thin black design. They're a lot less clunky than the Windows mixed reality controllers. While the battery life could have been improved on these, and a lot of people did have issues with the battery covers coming off, it was pretty clear these were the future. The tracking also had some issues, but it got better with every software update. I'm going to put these in A tier. They were just the step in the right direction. Now, the Focus Plus got an update with these 6 degrees of freedom tracking controllers. They just don't fit in your hands right, and the buttons were super mushy. It's impressive that they were able to get these to work, but the tracking just isn't good. There's also a bit of a wobble while you're holding them due to the poor tracking. The tracking's terrible and it cuts out all the time. Using them for any sort of game is a frustrating experience. The battery lasts longer than you would ever want to use them for. I'm gonna have to put them in E tier. I don't think I would ever want to use these again. Most companies at this time were switching to more inside-out tracking controllers and away from the Steam VR tracking. Vive released the Cosmos and followed that trend, aiming to improve on their previous Focus Plus controller design. I love the addition of 2 buttons on the trigger, but no game really utilized this. The controllers were comfortable to hold and they had a much cooler design than other Windows mixed reality controllers. The tracking was just abysmal. I always had issues with the battery life, and sometimes just bringing them up, they just would never work. It was driving me crazy. I'm gonna have to put it in A tier. I still prefer them to those crappy 3DOF controllers, but they were just so frustrating to use and I don't ever want to pick them up again. So Valve decided to separate from HTC and build their own headset with their brand new industry-leading Knuckles controllers. The hype surrounding these was massive. Instead of having a grip sensor, they use capacitive touch sensors, which can track your individual fingers opening and closing. The way the controller was built, it had a strap around the outside, so you could let go of things in the virtual world while you're letting go of things in the controller. It was such a seamless and natural experience in games like Half-Life Alyx and Boneworks. They use Valve's 2.0 base stations, which, apart from the annoying setup and maintenance, the tracking is just completely flawless and perfect. The battery lasts about 7 hours, and the shell around it shields your knuckles from punching the wall. That said, the industry just moved away from their capacitive touch sensor finger tracking and towards grip buttons. Lots of games were optimized for the grip buttons, not Valve's controllers. So while playing things like Pavlov, it's not quite certain if you have to have your hand open or closed. It's pretty obvious that Half-Life Alyx was designed with this in mind, as you can't let go of your gun. The amount of people that experienced issues with the joysticks was countless.
Anyway, it's going in S tier.
I really do love them. It desperately needed an update that it never got. Classic Valve. One of the biggest VR headset releases of all time, the Quest 2 got released. We had these updated controllers, which were a little bit wider, white, and had a ridiculously long battery life. They would run on one AA battery and just last for months. It just baffled me. The tracking had issues, but every single week it felt like it was getting better with software updates. The AI was able to often quite accurately predict where your hand was when it was out of view of the camera. The algorithms they made for this are just incredible. The touch sensors and the grips are just perfect. One of my favorite controllers ever. One of the best features as well is when you just lifted them up, they instantly work. No fiddling around, they were just on and in your hands. Some controllers you have to reset, turn them on. These were just on in the game, ready to go. These are just going straight into A tier. Wow. Then the Pico Neo 2 released with some strange controllers we haven't seen since the Razer ones. At the top of the headset, there was this bar that created a magnetic field that the controllers would then get picked up by. It could even track your controllers through your body. Just incredible. And it worked up to 1.5 meters away. However, the tracking is much looser than the inside-out tracking we got on the Quest 2. You could definitely notice a slight shake and delay. I wonder if it's due to Pico software or that's just the technology. I wonder why Meta didn't utilize this tracking approach. I'm sure there's a good reason why. The batteries only lasted about 2 to 3 hours, and depending on how far away they were from the headset, it affected it. I'm gonna have to put it in C tier because of the comfort issues and the slight delay. So Vive's trajectory on controllers has been on the decline for a while, and to try and revive the brand, they released the Vive Focus 3, their flagship headset with these new inside-out controllers and a more questy design. The tracking on these was just abysmal, and it teeters on unusable. Often while playing, it just glitches out. It drove me insane.
The triggers also have this weird thing where they double click at the bottom.
Because of the tracking issues, I'm just gonna have to put them in D tier. I really didn't enjoy using these. So then Pico decided to ditch their magnetic tracking and switch to inside-out tracking. And we got these new controllers with the Pico 3. They're comfortable to hold and the tracking was good enough. That said, it's not as good as the Quest 2. But I'm happy to see an extra button which sends you back in the UI. But the controller was also very wobbly. But overall it was pretty good and I'm gonna put it in B tier. Pimax, everyone's favorite VR company, finally decided to make their own VR controllers. They're made to be used with Steam VR and feature a trackpad instead of a joystick. Along with the software and comfort issues, the general community just wasn't happy with these. They also had issues tracking when you would move them really quickly. They're gonna have to go into D tier. Okay, then we have the Quest Pro controllers, which I was so excited for when they released. Holding them, they feel perfectly comfortable. They just feel so small and fit the contours of your hand perfectly. The tracking is the best out of any VR controller in my opinion. No need for controllers, the onboard processor and cameras can track you anywhere. To charge them, you just have to pop them on the dock, and it's amazing. The only issue I had with these is sometimes they just take a little bit of time to turn on. You don't just lift them and they work. It can take 20 to 30 seconds sometimes. It did happen to me a few times where you lift them up and they're just not in the right position, so you have to shake them around a bit. That said, they going in S tier for me. Hands down the best controllers and just a marvel of engineering. This is the first time tracking on standalone headsets got better than the original headsets. Then the Pico 4 was released, often just referred to as the Quest 2 of China. It came with these newly designed controllers that threw in an extra record button on top of the Quest's controls. It came with rings on the outside that apparently help with occlusion. Honestly, I think it looks nicer than the Quest 2 and I prefer this design. You probably already know that the tracking just isn't as good as the Quest, but it's good enough, and I'm gonna throw them in B tier. Then PlayStation thought they would have another crack at VR. Coming with the inside-out tracking controllers, they seem to be good enough. A lot of reviewers complained about the creak and said they were a bit flimsy. One of the hands-down best features is the capacitive triggers. They have force feedback, meaning you could feel the feedback when you were firing something like a gun. This just felt amazing. The battery lasted about 4 hours and the rings are on the outside, which you guys know I prefer. It just protects your hands and feels a lot better with the weight distribution. They were overall pretty good, and I'm gonna put them into B tier. And then we got the Quest 3 controllers, which removed the tracking rings. Surprisingly, it didn't seem to affect tracking at all, and Meta's accuracy has just gotten better and better over time. They really worked on improving their algorithms. The controllers are super comfortable and incredibly light, a lot lighter than the Quest Pro controllers. I'm gonna have to put them in A tier. Behind the Quest Pro, I think they're the industry standard. They're just so far ahead of the other offerings. And with a lot of hype, Apple released the Vision Pro. Surprisingly, it released with no controllers. You would look at something with your eyes and then pinch your fingers. While innovative and implemented absolutely perfectly, it's almost completely useless for games, which I found a bit frustrating. That said, for general productivity tasks, it seems to do the job and it's much more efficient. But for games, I mean, how can you just use your hands? It just seemed completely useless.
I'm gonna have to put it in B tier.
The Quest Pro is going to get the king spot. Despite those issues with it turning on, it's just the best offering out there. An absolute marvel of engineering. And in the trash spot, I'm just going to have to put all those 3DOF remotes in. I just thought they were shocking. Let me know what you think, and I'll leave a poll below so you can vote on your own. Thanks so much for watching the video, and I'll see you all next time.